There is a free agent I want to toss out there that I tossed out this morning. I was listening to Bussin' with the Boys with Will Compton and Taylor Lewan. And, if you haven't listened to that, I think they're good. I think that show is phenomenal, except
Hilarious,
for when, dude, it's a great podcast. Although I listened to the Pivot one the other day that's from like a year ago or whatever. Didn't enjoy that at all. There's just too many people in that bus. Ryan Clark talks way too much. I have a lot of respect for Ryan Clark and what he does, but, sometimes you just got to sit back. But Taylor was on there talking about his situation with the Tennessee Titans. And he said very, very straightforward. I believe that they're going to cut me. He's a 9-year vet. He's had 2 torn ACLs in the last 3 seasons, which is very concerning. And he's about to get $14 million next year. He expects to be a free agent come February, March. If you're the Steelers and you're just looking for options at left tackle, I believe, is that a name you would consider, or is his injury troubles just too much to go out and reach out?
Yeah, it's tough because you mentioned obviously he's second torn ACL this season. And he also, after the first one, they didn't, I guess, like it didn't heal the right way. He had to have a follow-up. He actually missed 5 games the following season due to having to get that cleaned up even more. And he said like he still hasn't felt the same. He needs a follow-up this time. He's openly talked about not just his uncertainty with the Titans, but like football in general, being due like 14.7 or whatever it is next season. But with the Titans not having any dead cap, if they cut him, it does seem likely that is the case. 31 years old. I kind of view it like an Eric Fisher situation last year where like a lot of people were clamoring to take a flyer on him. I can't say that I would mind it, but if you're going into the season with him being like stamped as your left tackle, I think that's kind of dangerous. Obviously, you have like Dan Moore, who hasn't necessarily taken the next step in year 2 like we would have hoped after a promising rookie season for a 4th round rookie. So maybe because he's in house and you have a fallback option, it could be, more worthwhile or enticing. I just think that the route to go is to finally invest in it in the draft. And I know that we're going to talk about that, but so I guess I'm on the fence. I don't mind them taking a flyer, but I don't think you can pay him like you're, guaranteed left tackle.
So is that where you would go in the first round of the draft? Is you'd go left tackle over any other position?
So it's tough because I'm of the mindset that you can't just go into the draft and say we're taking this position, because then you could miss out on getting the best possible player by doing so. Give me a situation where Paris Johnson, Peter Skoronski, and Broderick Jones are all gone. I probably wouldn't want the Steelers to go tackle in that situation just to take a tackle, especially because what could be on the board there at like corner or something like that, where there's like 5 or 6 guys that I personally think should go round 1. I don't think that they all do, but then in that case, that could be more beneficial to the Steelers, who are going to have one of the first, 2 or 3 picks in round 2, thanks to the Bears, to take one in that spot. So while tackle is like my ideal situation, I don't think I can go into it thinking they got to take a tackle regardless, because then, the value might not match up.
So where's your line of you have to sign somebody as well as an emergency blanket or like a bridge left tackle to where you're like, okay, I no longer feel, because in my eyes, like 2nd round picks are good. They don't always pan out as a rookie.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Is that like, are you comfortable walking into the season with a 2nd round pick as your starting left tackle for Kenny Pickett, who like that is this is the year you have to invest in your left tackle one way or the other. Absolutely. Because you can't walk into next season risking this guy's health? Or is it like where's your line? Where's that line before it's okay, we also have to have a security blanket?
Well, yeah, it would be if they don't get one in the 1st round, in my opinion, just because to me, there's only like, and this could be me being a little bit lower on the tackle class as opposed to most people. And granted, I haven't done a ton of tape watching yet on these guys. There's only 3 guys that I would feel really good about plugging and playing at left tackle next year, and those are the 3 names I just mentioned. So what also gives me a little bit of pause, though, and I want to mention this before we continue on with the offensive line talk, is, and I've talked with Ramon Foster, former Steeler, about this before, is you don't want to continue to bring in new pieces on the offensive line, because like we've seen them start to grow here and get some cohesion. They're playing better since the bye week. Clearly, there's still a lack of talent there, and that's why I think, the biggest cap tip of all the Steelers season could go to Pat Meyer, the offensive line coach, for bringing these guys 100%. Along. 100%. But to me, you don't want to just continue to bring in new pieces, whether that's through the draft or free agency, just because now you're starting to mess with that continuity that they've gained and that traction they've started to build. So While like tackle to me, and I think it's better to go in the draft just because those guys are still so moldable and coachable. They haven't experienced NFL life yet. If you go out and bring in another outside free agent, they just brought in 2 last year. You're going to have these guys that already have been accustomed to life a certain way in the NFL and probably have their own style of doing things. And you got to start teaching them the ropes, and now they got to be brought in and how things work here and stuff like that. So that to me is why I'm going draft route for the tackle spot. I think it's much easier to get a corner or something like that, like a day one start, or not day one, but a guy that can start immediately in free agency at cornerback or something like that. Like they need help on the D line too. I mean, we could talk about their needs all day, but to me, if they don't get one of those top 3 tackles, I don't think that's a plug and play guy.
I agree. That's a good point. Like your cohesion point is very something I haven't really thought about, because you want the talent and like you want them to mesh, but at the same time you want the right pieces to be meshing, instead of like you can't have Dan Moore Jr. as your left tackle for the next 10 years.
Yeah.
You just can't. But at the same time, you can move him down to guard if they're open to that. I don't know if they are right now, and then you only have to replace one piece to the offensive line instead of 2. But I agree, like you don't, that might remove the whole Taylor Lewan question, because at that point you're thinking, okay, are you going to go another piece to the year for 1 year and then plug a rookie in and then have everybody adapt? And at that point, Mason Cole's contract's up, so you have to work with that one at that point. James Daniels' contract's up, so you have to work with that one at that point. You're going to figure out Chooks. You have to figure out your left guard, because Kevin Dotson's not sticking around forever if he even sticks around next season. I agree. I think
to me that's the one that I think before Dan Moore, I think Kevin Dotson's spot left guard is the one that I would say has the best chance of turning over next year.
I would agree with that. Like that it has the best shot of being turned over. I think that like there is nothing keeping Kevin Dotson in that starting role this year. But where are you personally? Do you replace the left tackle or you replace Kevin Dotson first?
Due to positional value and left tackle being the most important one on the offensive line, that is the one that I'm upgrading. I'm just from what I've heard and what I've seen, it seems like left guard has a better shot of turning over next year than left tackle. And that's probably just because you look at, Kevin Dotson was here a year before Dan Moore Jr. was. So you have another year on Dan Moore's contract.
Yeah, it's very true. I don't know. I think that you replace them both, move on from there. Have you been impressed with Mason Cole and James Daniels enough to keep him?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, James Daniels. And I look at Mason Cole when he was playing, really well up until he got that foot injury, which I think has kind of been nagging him since then. But, credit to him. I think that he's looked healthier and better the last couple of weeks as this run game started to gain some traction. But to me, those are the 2 guys, and I just mentioned, bringing them in as outside free agents that have been their 2 best offensive linemen this year. So, all credit in the world to the scouts for NFL scouts for bringing them in, not obviously the draft ones, but in the organization for finding these guys. James Daniels, to me, I don't know why Chicago let him get away. Mason Cole was kind of an undervalued guy in Minnesota, was kind of like a swing interior offensive lineman type that you didn't think was like a plug and play starter, but could be like a depth option that could play center or guard. But he's panned out very well in my opinion. But I think the thing with him too, and this is interesting too, because people have brought up maybe you get a center and let Mason Cole take that left guard spot from Dotson. So I think that could be another potential option.
I don't know though, because at that point you'd have to really evaluate positions and who's available, because at that point you're getting Kenny adjusted to Mason Cole, and Mason Cole is like the vocal point of that offensive line this season. James Daniels is like the leader, the quote unquote leader. He's the guy teaching everybody. He's the veteran presence. But Mason Cole is like the quote. He is a center. Like you talk to Marquise Pouncey, you're like, oh, that guy plays center. Mason Cole, you're like, oh, that guy plays center. I think that to move him, you're gonna, for one, have to adjust to a new center if you're Kenny Pickett, and you're going to have to hope that he works out at left guard and that the new center works out instead of just finding a guard. You know what I mean? I feel like you could keep.
No, it's not what I would do. But the Michigan center, which is funny because Mason Cole also comes from Michigan, Oluwatimi, he just won the Remington. People have thrown out his name, like, maybe you bring him in and maybe Mason Cole does stay at center. This guy plays guard. People have just thrown his name around there. Just that's a way to upgrade center or guard, regardless of which one, is playing where. But to your point, like Kenny Pickett this year, he's taking all these reps from Mason Cole. As long as it's working, Mason Cole has worked at center. Why would you even, mess with that?
No, that's exactly how I look at it. You replace Dan Moore, you replace Kevin Dotson, you keep everybody else. You got to make a decision on Chooks. I guess that's the perfect way to end this offensive line talk. Do you, if the season ended today, would you resign, not resign, but would you keep Chooks next season, even though his cap hit takes such a huge spike, or do you get rid of him?
Um, he's literally here. For people that are watching, I'm just drawing a straight line because I don't think there's anywhere up or down to go from him. He just is what he is. It's crazy because he's still relatively young, like because he came in as such a young player. But I think he's really good in pass pro, just doesn't offer a lot in the run game. But like I think he's fine. And to your point, when they signed that 3-year extension, it was really a 1-year extension, and they would go from there to see how that year one went. But to go back to my point about continuity and wanting to keep pieces in place as long as you can, like I don't think he's done anything to necessarily warrant moving on from. And you got to keep some guys, in house. You just can't keep turning over. Like I don't think that he's been bad enough to warrant moving on from him. I think he's been fine, and he has been the one guy that's kind of been around, being here since 2018. So he's kind
Yeah.
of become, while you mentioned like James Daniels coming in and being like a vocal leader for them and stuff like that, I think Chooks, because of how long he's been in that locker room, and going back to again a conversation I've had with Ramon, has kind of taken on that role as like the tenured guy.
Yeah, he is. He's definitely like the consistency, I believe, which
Mm-hmm.
is good. Like you definitely want that. There's concerns though. Like the guy's got absolutely zero ability to run block whatsoever. In my
Yeah.
opinion, like, you evaluate this guy week after week and you're like, okay, well, you can't run to the right side because that's just not his game. But a $9 million spike, I don't know, that's concerning to me. It's something that you have to, I think, take into consideration once you have a full roster. Like once you're looking at, okay, well, we need to do this, we need to do that. It is an inside linebacker more valuable than a just baseline right tackle. How much better can Chooks get? Because like you said, he's what, 24 years old still. He's still very young. Can he improve to a $13 million a year right tackle? I just think there's a lot of questions. I don't expect him to leave, but I think it's very brushed under the rug of how, I don't know, like how his value is not going to match his consistency next season. And because of that, I think it needs to be addressed. Like I'm a Trooks supporter. He's a terrible interview, so it doesn't help my job. But when it comes to evaluating offenses, I think he's just fair. Like he's not a guy that I'd be like, oh, this is a problem with the offense. I think it's the other side of the offensive line. But at the same time, there's a lot of, and your point of the consistency, I think is the biggest thing with the Steelers right now. Something I haven't thought about, so I'm glad that you brought that up. Where it could definitely work in his favor.
I want to
Um,
say one other thing too about this is I look at, and this isn't, me advocating for overpaying guys during this either, but when nobody's really making any money on the offense, like not just the offensive line, the offense in general, I think it's more palatable for him to be making what he's going to next year. When you still have a guy under a rookie contract at quarterback, you're running back, you haven't paid, Pat yet. Like Deontay Johnson right now is really the only guy making money on this offense.
oh
So,
yeah. Yeah. I mean, you have 4 years, 5 years before you have to worry about cap hits if you're Pittsburgh, like whatsoever. The only issue is how many defensive guys can you sign to major contracts before you're like, okay,
right.
this has come back to bite me in the butt.
Mhm.
And I think next season they're going to see that where it's like, okay, Cam's contract is rough and it's maybe not warranted, and Deontay's is maybe not warranted, but they're there and we got to keep them. And they're not guys that you're going to get rid of. So you just have to live with it. But I agree with that. Like until Kenny is on his second contract or approaching it, you don't have to worry about a thing if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers. Like you could do whatever. You could go sign anybody. That was my argument with everybody was talking. Oh, Deebo Samuels is a myth. That'll never happen. I'm like, dude, if they offered him enough money, anything could happen. Anything in the world could happen because if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, you have no worries financially until Kenny Pickett's on a second contract. That's just what you could go. You could have signed Chase Claypool in the offseason, Alex Highsmith, and then just been like, all right, well, we have to find scrubs everywhere else, but we don't have a quarterback contract. So we got all the room in the world. And that's just what it happens. Teams win Super Bowls on rookie contracts because of this. And
Mhm.
I think the Steelers have to take full advantage of that.